The sound of fabric tearing cut through the diner like a gunshot. Destiny Johnson stood frozen beside the overturned table, her uniform shirt hanging in shreds from Harrison Wellington's desperate grip. The 82nd Airborne tattoo blazed across her dark shoulder blade under the fluorescent lights, but it was the name etched beneath the wings that made Harrison stumble backward as if struck. 30 customers sat in stunned silence, watching the arrogant millionaire's face crumble from racist fury to something else entirely. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back 3 days to when Destiny first arrived in Milbrook. The black Porsche 911 cut through downtown Milbrook like a blade through silk. Behind the wheel, Harrison Wellington adjusted his platinum Rolex and surveyed his kingdom through tinted windows. Construction crews worked his will on half the main street. Old shops reduced to rubble, new glass towers rising in their place. October leaves swirled around the demolition sites like confetti celebrating his victory. "Sir, Ruby's diner still won't budge," his assistant Garrett spoke through the Bluetooth. "She hung up on me again." Harrison's jaw tightened. The weathered brick building sat like a stubborn tooth in his perfect smile of development. Red and white checkered curtains mocked him from windows he should have owned months ago. A hand-painted sign reading, "Ruby's Home, cooking since 1987, might as well have said, "Screw you, Wellington." "Then we escalate," Harrison said, parking across from the diner. "I want that property. File the noise complaints. Triple the health inspections. Make her life hell until she begs me to buy her out." Through the diner's window, he watched the elderly black woman who dared defy him. Ruby Patterson wiped tables with the same methodical care she'd shown for 37 years. Gray hair pulled back in a practical style, flour dusting her apron from the morning's fresh biscuits. She moved like someone carrying invisible weights. Harrison stepped from his car, 6 feet of inherited privilege wrapped in a tailored navy suit. His father's money, his grandfather's name, his great-grandfather's land deals had built this empire. Now he would finish what they started. Turn this dying town into something profitable. Something clean. Something without people like Ruby Patterson cluttering up the view. The diner's bell chimed as he entered. Conversations stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Ruby looked up from her coffee pot, and Harrison saw her shoulders sag slightly. "We're closed for lunch prep," Ruby said quietly. "I'm not here to eat." Harrison's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd never heard the word, "no stick." "I'm here to make you an offer. Final offer." Ruby set down the coffee pot. Her hands shook slightly. "I told you. This place isn't for sale. Everything's for sale. Ruby. Question is price." Harrison pulled out his phone, scrolled to his banking app. $2 million. Cash. Today. Gasps rippled through the diner. $2 million could buy half the town. Ruby's eyes widened, but she shook her head. "This diner is my life. My late husband built these tables. Our daughter took her first steps right there by the register. You can't buy memories, Mr. Wellington." Harrison's pleasant mask slipped. "You're being stupid. Take the money and retire somewhere nice. Somewhere appropriate for someone like you." The racial undertone hit like a slap. Ruby's customers, mostly elderly locals who'd been coming here for decades, shifted uncomfortably. But Ruby just straightened her spine. "I said no." Harrison pulled out a manila folder, spread photographs across the counter. Ruby's face went pale. The images showed her diner at night, windows broken, graffiti sprayed across the walls, "Sell or else," painted in red letters. "Shame about all the vandalism lately," Harrison said. "Really terrible what's happening to businesses that don't have proper protection." Ruby's hand trembled as she touched the photos. The other customers saw them too. Mrs. Patterson from the church gasped. Frank, the retired mailman, stood up angrily. "You threatening her?" Frank stepped forward. Harrison's smile turned ice cold. "I'm offering solutions to problems. Problems that might get worse if she keeps being unreasonable." Ruby looked around at her customers, her friends, and saw their fear. They were all elderly, all vulnerable. Harrison wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening everyone she cared about. "Get out," Ruby whispered. "I'll be back tomorrow. With lawyers. With inspectors. With whatever it takes." Harrison gathered his photos. "This isn't over, Ruby. Not until I get what I want." The bell chimed again as he left. Ruby sank onto a stool, the weight of his threat crushing down on her. Outside, Harrison made a phone call. "It's time for Phase 2. Make sure she understands what happens to people who cross the Wellington family." 300 miles away, Corporal Destiny Johnson stood in her cramped apartment bathroom, staring at herself in a cracked mirror. The reflection showed a 28-year-old black woman with intelligent brown eyes and natural hair pulled into a tight bun. Scars mapped her left shoulder from shrapnel wounds. The 82nd Airborne tattoo on her back told stories she tried not to remember. Her phone buzzed. Text from her landlord: "Rent was due yesterday. Pay by Friday or you're out." Destiny's savings account showed $347. Her last job at the hardware store had ended when the owner decided he needed someone more reliable. Code for someone who didn't wake up screaming from nightmares about roadside bombs and dead soldiers. She scrolled through her contacts, stopped at Ruby Milbrook. Her grandmother's oldest friend. Destiny hadn't called in 2 years, not since she'd lied about why she was leaving for deployment. She'd told Ruby she was relocating overseas for family reasons. Anything to avoid explaining why a small-town girl was suddenly joining the army. The phone rang 3 times. "Hello." Ruby's voice sounded strained. "Ruby, it's Destiny. Destiny Johnson." "Destiny? Oh my goodness, baby. It's been so long. How are you? Where are you calling from?" "I'm doing okay, Ruby. Still in Cincinnati. How have you been? How's the diner?" "Oh, same old, same old. Keeping busy. The regulars still ask about you sometimes. Mrs. Coleman from the church was just saying last week how much she missed your grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe." Destiny smiled despite her circumstances. "I miss that recipe too. And I miss Milbrook. Ruby, I've been thinking about you a lot lately." "That's sweet, honey. You always were such a thoughtful girl. Are you working? Settled down anywhere nice?" "Well, that's actually—" "Ruby, I know it's been a while since we talked, and I hate to call you like this, but I'm in a tough spot financially. I was wondering if you could maybe loan me some money until I get back on my feet? I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." Silence stretched longer than comfortable. Then, "Oh honey, this isn't a good time. The diner's going through some repairs. Things are tight right now. Maybe you should stay where you are for now. Cincinnati's a good city with lots of opportunities." But Destiny heard something else in Ruby's voice. Fear. The same tone soldiers used when they were trying not to panic their families during video calls home. Ruby was deflecting, trying to protect her. "Ruby, what's wrong? What kind of repairs? You sound scared." "Scared? No, baby. Just tired. You know how it is running a business. Always something breaking down, always some expense you weren't expecting." "Ruby, I've known you since I was 12 years old. This isn't your tired voice. This is your worried voice. What's really going on?" Another pause. "It's nothing for you to worry about, sweetie. Just some maintenance issues. Nothing I can't handle." "What kind of maintenance issues require repairs that make you sound like you're afraid to be in your own building?" Just some maintenance issues. Nothing for you to worry about. I should go." "Ruby, wait dash." The line went dead. Destiny stared at her phone. Ruby had practically raised her after her grandmother passed. She'd never hung up on Destiny before. Never sounded so broken. Destiny opened her laptop, searched for news from Milbrook. The headlines made her stomach drop. Wellington development continues downtown expansion. Local businesses close as property values soar. Ruby's Diner, last holdout against progress? The last article included a photo of Ruby looking exhausted outside her diner. Behind her, broken windows were covered with plywood. Destiny closed the laptop. She packed everything she owned into 2 duffel bags, loaded them into her 15-year-old Toyota Camry, and started driving toward Milbrook. Ruby had lied about the repairs. Someone was hurting her. And Destiny had learned in Afghanistan that when good people were under attack, you didn't abandon them. You fought back. The highway stretched ahead, taking her toward a confrontation she couldn't yet imagine. In her rearview mirror, her past grew smaller. Ahead lay a town where old wounds would tear open, where buried truths would surface, and where 2 people carrying the same grief would discover that some connections run deeper than hatred. But first, she had to save the woman who'd been like a grandmother to her, even if it meant revealing everything she'd tried to leave behind. Destiny's Camry wheezed into Millbrook as dawn painted the sky orange and pink. She'd driven through the night, surviving on gas station coffee and determination. The town looked smaller than she remembered from childhood visits. Main Street stretched 6 blocks before surrendering to farmland and forest. Half the storefronts stood empty, their windows papered with "For Lease" signs bearing the same phone number. She parked outside Ruby's diner and her heart sank. Plywood covered 2 windows. Fresh graffiti spelled "Close Now" across the brick wall in dripping red paint. The cheerful red and white awning hung torn on one side, flapping in the morning breeze like a wounded bird. Ruby emerged from the back door, moving like someone expecting an attack. She wore a faded blue dress and her grandmother's pearl earrings, but her usual confidence had evaporated. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her keys. Ruby! Ruby spun around, nearly dropping her purse. When she saw Destiny, relief and panic warred across her face. "Child, what are you doing here? I told you not to come." Destiny gestured at the damage. "You told me repairs. This doesn't look like repairs, Ruby." Ruby's shoulders sagged. She looked up and down the empty street, then motioned Destiny inside quickly. The diner's interior told the rest of the story. Someone had thrown rocks through the front windows 2 days ago. Broken glass still crunched underfoot despite Ruby's cleanup efforts. Spray paint covered the back wall. Sell or burn. The cash register sat dented and crooked. Chairs had been overturned and scratched. Who did this? Destiny's voice carried the controlled anger she'd learned in combat zones. "I don't know for certain." Ruby's lie came out strained. "Just kids, probably. Vandalism happens." Destiny walked to the damaged register, noted the precision of the destruction. The attackers had known exactly where to hit to cause maximum financial damage without triggering serious police investigation. This wasn't random teenage mischief. "Ruby, I've seen occupation tactics. Someone's trying to drive you out systematically." Ruby busied herself straightening undamaged chairs. "It's nothing I can't handle. You should go back home, baby. This town isn't safe right now." "Then why are you staying?" Ruby stopped moving. Her hands gripped the back of a chair until her knuckles showed white. "This diner is all I have left. Your grandmother and I planned this place together when we were girls. My Harold built these booths with his own hands. Our daughter Grace learned to count money at that register." Tears gathered in Ruby's eyes. "If I leave, they win. If I stay, they'll destroy me piece by piece. I'm trapped. Destiny. And I'm so tired of being afraid." Destiny pulled Ruby into a hug, feeling how fragile the older woman had become. Ruby had always been their neighborhood's rock, the woman who fed anyone hungry and never asked for payment. Seeing her broken triggered something protective in Destiny's chest. "Then don't fight alone. Let me help. You don't understand what you're asking. These people have money, power, connections. They can make you disappear. Let me worry about that. I need work anyway, and you need help. Pay me whatever you can afford." Ruby pulled back, studying Destiny's face. "What happened to that overseas family situation you mentioned? I thought you were settled somewhere safe." Destiny's throat tightened. The lies she'd told felt heavier now, looking into Ruby's trusting eyes. She'd claimed family emergency to explain her sudden departure for basic training. Easier than admitting she'd joined the army to escape her small-town life and prove herself worthy of something bigger. That situation ended. "I need a fresh start." Ruby nodded, accepting the half-truth. The pay won't be much. Tips are down since the trouble started. Most of my regulars are too scared to come in. I don't need much. Just enough to get by while I figure out what's next. Ruby walked to the damaged register, pulled out a server's apron. You sure about this? Once you put this on, you're part of whatever's coming. Destiny tied the apron around her waist. The familiar weight of service felt good after months of unemployment and purposelessness. I'm sure. They spent the morning cleaning and preparing for the lunch rush. Ruby taught Destiny the menu, the regular customers' preferences, which tables to avoid because of loose legs. Normal restaurant training that felt surreal given the boarded windows and threatening graffiti. At 11:30, the first customers arrived. Frank, the retired mailman from yesterday, entered cautiously with his wife Helen. They chose a table near the back exit and kept their voices low. 3 elderly church ladies followed, whispering among themselves and glancing nervously at the street. They're all afraid, Destiny observed while refilling coffee. They should be, Ruby replied. Yesterday a man came in here and made it clear what happens to businesses that don't cooperate with his development plans. What man? Ruby's face went pale. Harrison Wellington. He owns half the town now, wants the other half. This diner sits right where he plans to build luxury condos. Destiny had heard the Wellington name growing up, always spoken with a mixture of respect and resentment. Old money family that traced their wealth back to railroad construction and government contracts. They owned the bank, the newspaper, most of the commercial real estate. Did he threaten you directly? He showed me pictures of the damage to my building. Pictures taken before I found it. Then he said problems might get worse if I kept being unreasonable. Rage flashed through Destiny's chest. She'd seen warlords use identical tactics in Afghanistan. Destroy property, terrorize civilians, then offer protection from the very violence they orchestrated. That's extortion. That's business, according to him. And the police chief plays golf with Harrison every Thursday. Ruby's voice carried years of accumulated helplessness. I called them about the vandalism. They took a report and said they'd look into it. That was 3 days ago. The lunch crowd stayed small and nervous. People ate quickly and left exact change, avoiding unnecessary conversation. The atmosphere felt like a village under siege, everyone waiting for the next attack. At 1:15, the black Porsche pulled up outside. Ruby froze, coffee pot shaking in her hands. He's back. Through the window, Destiny watched Harrison Wellington emerge from his car. Tall, perfectly groomed, moving with the casual arrogance of inherited power. His expensive suit and confident stride marked him as predator in a landscape of prey. Go to the kitchen, Destiny said quietly. No. He comes for me, not you. Ruby, I've dealt with bullies before. Let me handle this. Harrison entered like he owned the place, which he clearly intended to. Conversations stopped. The church ladies gathered their purses nervously. Frank started to stand, but Helen pulled him back down. Harrison surveyed the damage to his handiwork with satisfaction, then chose a center table where everyone could see him. He made a show of checking his expensive watch and sighing dramatically. Service in this town keeps getting worse, he announced to no one in particular. Destiny approached with a menu and water glass, keeping her movements professional but alert. Years of military training had taught her to read threats, and this man radiated dangerous entitlement. Welcome to Ruby's. What can I get you today? Harrison looked up, his eyes scanning her with the calculating assessment of a man who categorized people into useful and disposable. His gaze lingered on her dark skin, her simple uniform, her obvious position serving him. Coffee. Black. And make sure the cup is clean. I have standards. The racial undertone hit like a slap, but Destiny kept her expression neutral. She'd faced worse than small-town racism in military mess halls and foreign combat zones. Coming right up. She returned with coffee, setting it down carefully. Harrison ignored her, pulling out his phone to make a call loud enough for the entire diner to hear. Cancel my 2 o'clock. I'm dealing with some local resistance to our downtown project. Nothing I can't handle. He paused, glancing around the room. Some people need more convincing than others, especially the older residents who don't understand progress. Ruby emerged from behind the counter, her face set with forced calm. Mr. Wellington, if you're here to eat, you're welcome. If you're here to threaten me again, please leave. Harrison's smile turned predatory. I'm here as a customer, Ruby. Though I do have some news about your property taxes. Seems there's been a reassessment. Your payments are going up substantially next month. Gasps echoed through the diner. Property tax manipulation was another classic pressure tactic. Ruby's face went white. That's impossible. This building hasn't been reassessed in 5 years. Strange how these things happen. Harrison sipped his coffee slowly. Of course, if you sold to Wellington Development, the new owners would handle all those tedious tax burdens. Destiny watched Ruby struggle between dignity and desperation. The older woman's hands shook as she gripped her apron. I told you yesterday. This place isn't for sale. Harrison's facade of civility cracked. You're being incredibly foolish, Ruby. I'm offering you a way out of this mess with dignity intact. Keep refusing, and things will get much worse. Are you threatening her? The words escaped Destiny's mouth before she could stop them. Harrison turned his attention to her, his expression shifting to cold amusement. And you are her employee. Her employee. Harrison repeated the words like they tasted bad. Well, employee, perhaps you should advise your boss about the realities of business. This town is changing whether she likes it or not. People who adapt prosper. People who resist get crushed. Destiny felt her military training kick in, reading Harrison's body language and vocal patterns. Classic intimidation tactics used by men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. Sounds like you're threatening a 67-year-old woman over a property dispute. Harrison's eyes narrowed. I'm discussing market realities with someone too stubborn to accept them. Though I suppose that's typical of people who refuse to accept their place in the natural order. The racist implication landed like a physical blow. Every customer in the diner heard it. Ruby's eyes filled with tears of humiliation and rage. That's enough. Destiny stepped forward. You've made your position clear. Now finish your coffee and leave. Harrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Listen to this. The help is giving me orders. He stood up slowly, using his height advantage to loom over Destiny. Do you have any idea who I am, girl? What I could do to you? I know exactly what you are. Something in Destiny's voice made Harrison pause. The confidence wasn't forced or desperate. It carried the weight of someone who'd faced real threats and survived them. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Then you know you should shut your mouth and bring me a fresh cup of coffee. This one's gone cold while I've been wasting time on your employer's stupidity. He deliberately knocked over the coffee cup, sending liquid cascading across the table and onto the floor. Brown stains spread across the white tiles like blood. Clean it up, Harrison commanded. And do it right this time. The diner went silent except for the steady drip of coffee hitting the floor. This was the moment Ruby's customers would remember, when they decided whether to stand with her or abandon her to Harrison's cruelty. Destiny looked at Ruby, saw the mixture of rage and helplessness in the older woman's eyes. She looked at the church ladies, Frank and Helen, the other customers who'd watched their community get picked apart piece by piece. Then she looked back at Harrison Wellington, and something cold and military settled into her expression. No. The word hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Harrison's face flushed red, then white, then red again. In 38 years of Wellington privilege, no service worker had ever refused him anything. Certainly not a black woman in a diner uniform. Excuse me. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. Destiny didn't flinch. I said no. You spilled your own coffee. Clean it up yourself. Frank started to rise from his table, but Helen yanked him back down. The church ladies clutched their purses like shields. Ruby stepped forward, terror and pride warring in her expression. Destiny, please. Just clean it up. No. Ruby. He did it on purpose. He can handle the consequences. Harrison's laugh came out strangled. Do you understand what you just did? I own this town. I own the bank that holds the mortgage on this building. I own the construction company that could demolish this place tomorrow. And you, some nameless waitress from nowhere, think you can tell me no? I just did. The simplicity of her response seemed to break something in Harrison's brain. His carefully constructed facade cracked wide open, revealing the spoiled child underneath the expensive suit. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I could make one phone call and have you arrested. Another call and you'd never work in this state again. I could destroy your entire pathetic life before dinner. Destiny's expression never changed. She'd heard similar threats from Taliban commanders and Iraqi insurgents. Men who thought violence and power were the same thing. They usually learned otherwise. Are you done? Harrison's eyes bulged. Done. I haven't even started. You want to play games with Harrison Wellington? Fine. Let's play. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number. Chief Morrison? Harrison. I need you at Ruby's Diner immediately. I'm being threatened by an unstable employee. Yes, I said threatened. She's clearly disturbed, possibly dangerous. Ruby gasped. Harrison, that's not true. She hasn't threatened anyone. Isn't it? Harrison's smile turned vicious. She refused a direct order from a customer. In some states, that's considered assault. Intimidation at minimum. Destiny recognized the tactic. False accusations backed by institutional power. She'd seen corrupt officials use identical strategies against civilians who couldn't fight back through proper channels. Call whoever you want, she said calmly. The truth doesn't change because you have connections. Harrison's phone buzzed. He answered without taking his eyes off Destiny. What do you mean he's busy? I don't care if there's a traffic accident. This is a priority. Fine. Tell him to get here when he can. He hung up, frustration crackling around him like electricity. The immediate cavalry wasn't coming. He'd have to handle this humiliation himself. You think you're clever, don't you? Standing up to the big bad rich man. Very inspiring. Very brave. His voice dripped sarcasm. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize. Then you're going to clean up that mess. Then you're going to quit this job and leave town. Because if you don't, I will make Ruby's life even more miserable than it already is. He gestured around the damaged diner. You think last night's visit was bad? That was just a taste. Keep pushing me, and your friend Ruby will lose everything. Her building, her business, her home. All because some stupid girl couldn't keep her mouth shut. Ruby's face went white. Destiny, please. Just do what he says. The plea in Ruby's voice cut deeper than Harrison's threats. Destiny saw the impossible position she'd created. Standing up to Harrison felt right, but the consequences would fall on Ruby. Every act of defiance would be paid for by an innocent woman who couldn't protect herself. See. Harrison's confidence returned. Ruby understands reality. You should listen to her. Destiny looked around the diner. Frank and Helen stared at their coffee cups, unwilling to meet her eyes. The church ladies whispered prayers under their breath. Everyone knew Harrison was wrong, but nobody had the power to stop him. This was how bullies won. Not through strength, but through making resistance cost more than submission. They turned victims into accomplices by threatening the people victims loved most. What's it going to be? Harrison checked his watch theatrically. I have a meeting at 3. We can finish this now, or I can make some phone calls that will finish Ruby's life tonight. Destiny's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to fight. She'd spent 18 months in Afghanistan learning that evil only stopped when good people forced it to stop. But this wasn't a combat zone. Ruby wasn't a fellow soldier who'd signed up for war. I'm waiting, Harrison said. Ruby touched Destiny's arm gently. It's okay, baby. I've been dealing with men like him my whole life. This is how it has to be. The resignation in Ruby's voice broke something in Destiny's chest. This was why she'd joined the army. To fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. to stand between the innocent and the monsters who preyed on them. But here, she was powerless. Worse than powerless. She was a liability. Destiny walked to the supply closet, retrieved a mop and towel. The diner stayed silent except for coffee still dripping onto the floor. Each drop sounded like a small defeat. She knelt beside Harrison's table and began cleaning. The brown stain spread wider as she worked, as if the mess was growing instead of shrinking. Harrison watched with visible satisfaction. That's better. See how much easier life is when everyone knows their place. Destiny didn't respond. She focused on the cleaning, trying to process what had just happened. She'd backed down. Surrendered. Let a racist bully win because fighting back would hurt an innocent woman. In Afghanistan, moral choices had been clearer. Enemy combatants wore different uniforms. Civilians were protected by international law. Rules of engagement defined acceptable responses to threats. Here, the enemy wore expensive suits and used lawyers instead of bullets. The battlefield was economic instead of geographic. And the people who needed protection were also the ones who'd suffer most from any escalation. Now apologize, Harrison said. Destiny's hand stilled on the mop. What? Apologize for your disrespectful behavior. I want to hear you say you're sorry for forgetting your place. Ruby made a small sound of protest. Harrison, she cleaned it up. That's enough. No. Ruby. It's not nearly enough. She embarrassed me in front of your customers. She needs to understand there are consequences for that kind of behavior. Destiny slowly stood up, mop in hand. Water dripped from the strands onto her shoes. Around the diner, people held their breath. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Louder. I want everyone to hear it. I'm sorry. Harrison's smile widened. Sorry for what, exactly? This was the moment Destiny understood why Ruby had sounded so broken on the phone. Harrison didn't just want compliance. He wanted humiliation. Complete psychological domination. The kind of systematic destruction that left people too shattered to ever resist again. She'd seen this before too. In villages where warlords demanded public submission ceremonies. In prisons where guards forced inmates to degrade themselves for minor infractions. The goal wasn't just obedience. It was the complete elimination of human dignity. I'm sorry for being disrespectful, Destiny said. And for forgetting my place. Good girl. Harrison's voice carried the patronizing tone of a master praising a trained animal. See how much better things go when everyone follows the natural order. He pulled out his wallet, dropped a single dollar bill on the wet table. For your excellent service. The insult hit like a physical blow. $1 tip after forced humiliation. The customers stared at their plates, ashamed to witness what was happening but too afraid to intervene. Harrison stood up, straightened his tie. Ruby, you have until tomorrow morning to reconsider my offer. $2 million. Cash. Immediate closing. After that, the price drops to $1 million. After next week, it drops to whatever I feel like paying when I take this place through foreclosure. He walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Ruby, if your new employee causes any more trouble, I'll assume you're encouraging her behavior. The consequences will reflect that assumption. The bell chimed as he left. Through the window, they watched him make another phone call from beside his Porsche. Ruby sank into a chair, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Destiny said, this time meaning it. I made everything worse. Ruby shook her head slowly. No, baby. You did what was right. I just can't afford right anymore. Frank finally stood up, his face red with shame and anger. That was wrong. What he did to you was wrong. But none of us stopped it, Helen added quietly. We all just sat here and watched. The church ladies nodded in guilty agreement. Everyone had witnessed Harrison's cruelty. Everyone had stayed silent. Everyone understood they were all complicit in Ruby's destruction. He owns us, Ruby said simply. All of us. Our mortgages, our businesses, our children's jobs. Cross Harrison Wellington, and you lose everything. Destiny finished cleaning the coffee spill, wrung out the mop with shaking hands. She'd thought her fighting days were over when she left the army. Thought she could find peace in civilian life, helping people in small, quiet ways. But evil didn't stay in foreign countries. It lived everywhere, wearing different faces and using different weapons. And sometimes the people who needed protection most were also the ones who couldn't afford the cost of being protected. Outside, Harrison's Porsche drove away. But his threat lingered like poison in the air. Tomorrow morning would bring another ultimatum. Another chance for Ruby to surrender or face escalation. And Destiny would have to decide whether fighting for what was right was worth destroying the person she was trying to save. The afternoon customers began leaving early, dropping exact change and avoiding eye contact. By 3 o'clock, the diner was empty except for Ruby and Destiny. "You should go," Ruby said softly. "Pack up tonight and leave in the morning. I'll give you what I can for gas money." "I'm not leaving you alone with him. You have to." He meant what he said about making things worse. And baby, they can get so much worse. Destiny looked around the damaged diner, at the boarded windows and threatening graffiti, at Ruby's exhausted face and trembling hands, at the $1 bill still sitting on the wet table like a monument to human cruelty. What if there was another way, she asked. There isn't. Men like Harrison always win. That's how the world works. But Destiny had learned something else in Afghanistan. Sometimes the world only worked that way because good people gave up too easily. Sometimes evil won because nobody was willing to pay the price of stopping it. And sometimes, when traditional tactics failed, you had to change the rules of engagement entirely. She picked up Harrison's dollar bill, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. A reminder of this moment. Of what happened when power went unchecked and cruelty faced no consequences. Tomorrow, Harrison would return for Ruby's answer. He expected either surrender or escalation along predictable lines. More threats, more property damage, more systematic intimidation. He wasn't expecting a war veteran with nothing left to lose and very specific skills for dealing with bullies who thought they were untouchable. The game was far from over. The October rain started just after sunset, turning Main Street into a river of reflected streetlights. Destiny sat in her Camry outside Ruby's diner, watching water cascade down the windshield. She'd been there for 3 hours, thinking about Harrison's dollar bill in her pocket and the look of defeat in Ruby's eyes. Ruby had closed early and gone home to her small apartment above the flower shop. "Lock up when you leave," she'd said, pressing the spare key into Destiny's palm. "And please, baby, be gone by morning." But Destiny couldn't leave. Not yet. Something about Harrison's confidence bothered her. His certainty that Ruby would fold, that the community would stay silent, that resistance was impossible. Men that confident usually had backup plans. At 8:30, headlights swept across the diner's parking lot. A white pickup truck with county plates pulled up beside a black sedan already parked in the shadows. Destiny slumped lower in her seat, watching through the rain. 3 men emerged from the vehicles. She recognized the stocky figure of Chief Morrison from newspaper photos. The other 2 wore work clothes and moved with the deliberate purpose of men following orders. One carried a toolbox. The other held what looked like official papers. They approached the diner's back entrance. Morrison produced keys that shouldn't have existed and let them inside. Light flickered on in the kitchen, then the main dining area. Destiny's military training kicked in. Surveillance mode. She pulled out her phone, started recording video through the rain-streaked window. Whatever they were doing, she needed evidence. For 20 minutes, she watched shadows move inside the diner. The men seemed to be installing something near the kitchen. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of them examining the old electrical panels and gas connections. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Stop watching or join them inside. Destiny's blood turned cold. Someone was watching her watch them. She scanned the street, looking for additional vehicles or concealed positions. The black sedan's passenger window was cracked open despite the rain. Another text. Come inside. Now. Or we call this in as breaking and entering. The same false accusation tactic Harrison had used earlier. But now she was actually outside a building she wasn't supposed to be near, holding keys she wasn't supposed to have. Even with Ruby's permission, it would look suspicious to anyone wanting to twist the facts. Destiny checked her phone's battery, made sure the video was still recording, and walked through the rain to the diner's front door. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the key, but her voice stayed steady. "Evening, gentlemen." Chief Morrison looked up from where he was examining the electrical panel behind the counter. A heavy-set man in his 50s with the soft look of someone who'd stopped caring about physical fitness years ago. "Ms. Johnson, isn't it? Harrison mentioned you might cause problems." "Just checking on the building. Ruby asked me to make sure everything was secure." "How thoughtful." Morrison's smile felt oily. "Actually, you're just in time. We're conducting a safety inspection. Found some serious code violations that need immediate attention." The two workers continued their tasks without acknowledging her presence. One was installing what looked like a new electrical meter near the kitchen. The other was documenting serial numbers on the gas equipment with unusual thoroughness. "Safety inspection at 8:30 at night?" Destiny kept her voice neutral. "During a rainstorm? Emergency situations require immediate response," Morrison replied. "Can't have unsafe buildings endangering the public." Destiny recognized the setup. Create violations that didn't exist, document them with official-looking paperwork, then use them to force compliance or closure. She'd seen similar tactics used by corrupt officials in occupied territories. "What specific violations are you finding?" Morrison gestured toward the kitchen. "Faulty electrical wiring. Gas line irregularities. Structural concerns. The kind of problems that could result in fires or explosions if not addressed immediately. Those same systems passed inspection 6 months ago. Things change. Equipment ages. Standards get updated." Morrison pulled out a clipboard thick with forms. "The good news is Wellington Development has connections with emergency repair services. They could have everything fixed by tomorrow afternoon. For a price, I assume." "Well, emergency repairs aren't cheap, but I'm sure Harrison would be willing to work out reasonable payment terms. Especially if Ruby reconsidered his purchase offer." The extortion was becoming more sophisticated. Create a safety emergency that required expensive repairs, then offer a buyout as the only financially viable solution. If Ruby refused, they'd condemn the building and take it through eminent domain for public safety. "Can I see the inspection report?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Official documents aren't public record until the investigation concludes. But I can tell you the preliminary findings are serious enough to require immediate action." One of the workers called out from the kitchen. "Chief, we've got a problem back here." Morrison and Destiny walked toward the kitchen. The worker was kneeling beside the main gas line, holding a small device that beeped irregularly. "Gas leak," the worker announced. "Small one, but it's been active for a while. Real dangerous situation." Destiny studied the man's positioning and equipment. Everything looked staged. The gas detector was pointed at a connection that had been working fine all day. The leak, if it existed, was conveniently discovered during an unauthorized midnight inspection. "That's strange," she said. "Ruby's been cooking on that line for 30 years without problems." "Gas leaks develop gradually," Morrison explained. "Probably been building pressure for months. Lucky we caught it before someone got hurt." "Lucky," Destiny agreed. The worker made a show of tightening connections and testing readings. "I can get a crew out here tomorrow to replace the whole system. Cost about $15,000 for parts and labor." $15,000 Ruby didn't have. For repairs to equipment that had been functioning perfectly until these men arrived to inspect it. Of course, if the building changes ownership, the new owner would be responsible for all safety upgrades, Morrison added helpfully. Save Ruby a lot of expense and liability. Destiny watched the careful choreography of manufactured crisis. These men had done this before, in other buildings, to other people who couldn't afford to fight back. A systematic campaign of regulatory harassment designed to force sales or bankruptcies. "How did you get keys to the building?" she asked. Morrison's smile tightened. Building department has master keys for all commercial properties. Emergency access for safety inspections. And Harrison called you directly about this emergency? Harrison Wellington is a concerned citizen who reported potential safety hazards. We take those reports seriously. The second worker finished documenting serial numbers and began photographing everything from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive record that would support whatever narrative they planned to construct. Destiny's phone vibrated with another text. Recording us won't help. Delete the video. She looked around the diner, trying to identify who had sent the message. Morrison was watching her expectantly. The workers stayed focused on their tasks. But someone knew she was recording. Problem with your phone? Morrison asked. Just checking the time. Getting late for everyone to be working. Safety doesn't keep regular hours. Neither does community service. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the boarded windows like fingers tapping impatiently. Destiny realized she was trapped here until they finished their performance. Leaving now would look suspicious. Staying meant watching them manufacture evidence against Ruby. Ms. Johnson, Morrison said conversationally, Harrison mentioned you're new in town. Looking for work. I found work. Here. Temporary work, though. This building probably won't be operating much longer. Safety concerns, you understand. The threat was clear. Play along with their charade, or watch Ruby's business get condemned for violations that didn't exist until tonight. What are you suggesting? Wellington Development is always looking for reliable people. Good benefits, steady pay, opportunities for advancement. Much better than working for a business that might not survive the next inspection. Destiny almost laughed. They were trying to buy her off. Offer her a job in exchange for abandoning Ruby and staying silent about tonight's activities. I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I am. Morrison shrugged. Your choice. Though you might want to consider what happens to people who work for businesses that can't meet safety standards. Unemployment benefits only last so long. The worker in the kitchen called out again. Chief, I'm seeing potential structural damage near the foundation. Might want to look at this. More manufactured problems. By tomorrow morning, they'd have enough documented violations to shut down the diner permanently or demand repairs costing more than Ruby could ever afford. Morrison walked toward the kitchen, leaving Destiny alone in the dining area. She used the moment to glance around, looking for the source of the text messages. Behind the front counter, a small device blinked red among the coffee supplies. Surveillance equipment. They'd been watching and listening to everything. Another text appeared. Smart girl. Now delete the recording and walk away. Destiny typed back. Who is this? Someone who knows what's best for everyone involved. She studied the device behind the counter. Professional-grade equipment, not something Chief Morrison would have access to. This operation was bigger than local corruption. Harrison had brought in specialists. The kitchen workers emerged, carrying their equipment. All done, Chief. Full report will be ready by morning. Morrison nodded, then turned to Destiny. Well, Ms. Johnson, you've witnessed an official safety inspection. I trust you understand the seriousness of what we found. I understand exactly what I witnessed. Good. Then you'll encourage Ruby to make the right decision tomorrow. For everyone's safety. They packed up their gear and headed for the door. Morrison paused at the threshold. One more thing. This inspection is confidential pending completion of the full safety report. Discussing it with unauthorized parties could interfere with an ongoing investigation. That's a serious offense. Another threat. Even talking about what she'd seen could result in charges. They'd thought of everything. I understand, Destiny said. Morrison smiled and led his team out into the rain. Their vehicles disappeared into the night, leaving Destiny alone in the diner with the hidden surveillance device and the knowledge that Ruby's situation had just become hopeless. She walked to the counter, examined the blinking device without touching it. Professional installation, probably transmitting to multiple locations. Harrison would know every word spoken in the diner from now on. Destiny looked directly into the hidden camera lens. "You missed something," she said to whoever was watching. She pulled out Harrison's dollar bill, unfolded it carefully, and placed it on the counter where the camera could see it clearly. "I served in Afghanistan. I know what occupation looks like. I know what happens when good people don't fight back. And I know what it takes to make bullies stop bullying." She walked toward the door, then turned back to face the camera. "Tomorrow, Ruby's going to refuse your offer again. And you're going to have to decide how far you're willing to go to get what you want. Because I've already decided how far I'm willing to go to stop you." Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. Destiny sat in her car for another hour, watching the diner and thinking about everything she'd learned. Harrison wasn't just buying property. He was systematically destroying a community, using official corruption and manufactured crises to eliminate any resistance. The people of Milbrook had been fighting this battle wrong. They'd tried to use legal channels against someone who controlled the legal system. They'd tried to reason with someone who profited from unreasonableness. But Destiny had learned different lessons in different places. Sometimes the only way to stop a war was to make the other side realize they couldn't win it. Tomorrow, Harrison would return for Ruby's final answer. He'd bring his manufactured violations, his purchase contracts, and his absolute certainty that resistance was futile. He wasn't expecting to meet someone who'd studied asymmetric warfare and understood exactly how to turn a powerful enemy's strengths into weaknesses. The game was about to change completely. What do you think Destiny learned from her military service that could help her stand up to Harrison's corruption? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about everyday heroes finding extraordinary courage. Destiny hadn't slept. She'd spent the night in her car, watching the diner and thinking about Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. About another small community caught between bullies with money and weapons. About what happened when good people tried to fight back using the wrong tactics. The memory came back sharp and clear as the October dawn broke over Milbrook. Forward Operating Base Chapman, 18 months ago. Intelligence reports about a local warlord named Hazrat Ghul who was systematically destroying villages that wouldn't pay protection money. Same pattern Harrison was using here. Manufactured crises, official corruption, escalating pressure until people broke. Destiny had been part of the team assigned to stop Ghul's operation. Traditional military approach. Identify the enemy, gather evidence, build a case, work through official channels. It had taken 6 weeks of careful investigation while 3 more villages burned. The breakthrough came when they realized they were fighting the wrong battle. Ghul wasn't just a criminal. He was a businessman who happened to use violence instead of lawyers. Stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like competitors. Her phone rang at 6 a.m. sharp. Ruby's number. Destiny? Thank God you're still here. Something terrible happened last night. What's wrong? Chief Morrison called. Said there was an emergency inspection at the diner. Found all kinds of safety violations. Gas leaks, electrical problems, structural damage. They're shutting me down until I can afford repairs. Destiny closed her eyes. How much? $23,000. For violations that weren't there yesterday. Ruby's voice cracked. He said I could reopen immediately if I sold to Wellington Development. They'd handle all the repairs as part of the purchase agreement. Where are you now? At the diner. Trying to figure out what to do. They posted a condemnation notice on the door. Official red tape everywhere. I'll be right there. Destiny drove through empty streets to the diner. The official notice covered half the front door, closed by order of Millbrook Building Department. Unsafe conditions. Authorized personnel only. Ruby stood inside, surrounded by boxes and tiers. She'd started packing her personal items from the kitchen, accepting defeat before the battle was truly lost. I'm finished, Ruby said without looking up. 37 years building this place, and it's over. Harrison won. Not yet, he hasn't. Destiny, they can condemn the building. Seize it for public safety. I looked up the laws last night. They have absolute authority when it comes to safety violations. Destiny examined the condemnation notice more carefully. Official letterhead, proper signatures, legal language that sounded intimidating to anyone unfamiliar with bureaucratic warfare. This notice is dated yesterday at 11 p.m., she said. 3 hours before the inspection actually happened. Ruby looked up. What? Look at the timestamp. They wrote this before they found any violations. Before they even started looking. Ruby studied the document, confusion replacing despair. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand what they're really doing. Destiny pulled out her phone, showed Ruby the video she'd recorded the night before. I was here. I watched them install the problems they're claiming to have found. Ruby's eyes widened as she watched the footage. Chief Morrison directing workers to create gas leaks and electrical faults. Professional-grade surveillance equipment being installed. The careful choreography of manufactured crisis. They're criminals, Ruby whispered. They're businessmen using criminal methods. There's a difference, and the difference matters when you're planning how to stop them. Destiny sat beside Ruby among the half-packed boxes. Time to tell the truth about who she really was and why she understood Harrison's tactics so well. Ruby, I lied to you about why I left town 2 years ago. I didn't relocate overseas for family reasons. I joined the army. Got deployed to Afghanistan for 18 months. Ruby's face showed hurt and confusion. Why would you lie about that? Because I was ashamed. Small-town girl who couldn't make it in civilian life, running away to become a soldier. It felt like failure. Oh, baby. But it wasn't failure. It was education. I learned things in Afghanistan that I never could have learned anywhere else. Things about how bullies operate. How they use fear and corruption to control communities. And most importantly, how to stop them. Destiny pulled up photos on her phone. Images from her deployment, convoy operations, village security meetings, community development projects. And one photo that made Ruby gasp. A young black woman in military fatigues standing beside a destroyed village. Smoke rising from burned buildings. Elderly locals staring at camera with the same defeated expression Ruby had worn yesterday. This is Spin Boldak village. Controlled by a warlord named Hazrat Ghul who used the exact same tactics Harrison's using here. Manufactured emergencies, corrupt officials, systematic intimidation until people gave up their land and businesses. Ruby studied the photo. What happened to them? They fought back. But first, they had to stop fighting the wrong war. Destiny scrolled to more photos. The same village 6 months later. Rebuilt, thriving, children playing in streets that had been empty battlefields. How? By understanding that Ghul wasn't unbeatable. He was just using tactics that worked because nobody knew how to counter them. Once we figured out his actual weaknesses, stopping him became straightforward. Ruby looked around her damaged diner, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in weeks. What were his weaknesses? Same ones Harrison has. Overconfidence. Dependency on corrupt networks. Assumption that victims won't fight back intelligently. Destiny stood up, pacing as she organized her thoughts. Ghul controlled his territory through 3 pillars. Fear, official corruption, and economic pressure. Sound familiar? That's exactly what Harrison's doing. Right. So we studied each pillar, found the weak points, then applied pressure strategically until the whole system collapsed. Destiny pulled out Harrison's dollar bill, smoothed it on the counter. This represents fear. He wants you to remember being humiliated, to internalize the idea that resistance is hopeless. She pointed to the condemnation notice. This represents official corruption. Chief Morrison, building inspectors, probably judges and city council members all working together. Finally, she gestured around the damaged diner. And this represents economic pressure. Destroy your livelihood until selling becomes the only survival option. Ruby nodded slowly. So how do we fight back? Same way we stopped Ghul. Turn his strengths into weaknesses. Destiny's phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. Saw your little speech last night. Cute. Delete the video and leave town, or things get much worse for everyone. She showed the message to Ruby. They're watching everything we do, listening to everything we say. In Afghanistan, That would be a huge tactical advantage for the enemy. Isn't it a huge advantage here too? Only if we use traditional resistance methods. But if we understand they're watching, we can control what they see and hear. Feed them false information. Make them overreact based on incomplete intelligence. Destiny walked to the hidden surveillance device behind the counter, spoke directly to it. Harrison, I know you're listening. Ruby's going to refuse your offer again today. But this time, she won't be facing you alone. She paused, letting that sink in. You think you're fighting a scared old woman and an unemployed waitress. You're not. You're fighting someone who spent 18 months learning how to dismantle operations exactly like yours. Ruby watched with growing amazement as Destiny continued. In Afghanistan, we had a saying, know your enemy better than he knows himself. So let me tell you what I know about you, Harrison. Destiny counted off points on her fingers. You inherited money but never earned respect. You use cruelty to feel powerful because you've never actually accomplished anything difficult. You surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear because you can't handle real criticism. Her voice hardened. And most importantly, you've never faced serious resistance because you've only picked on people who couldn't fight back. That's about to change. She walked away from the surveillance device, back to Ruby. In Spin Boldak, Ghoul made the same mistake Harrison's making. He assumed his victims would keep using tactics that didn't work. Keep appealing to authorities he controlled. Keep trying to fight fair against someone who cheated. What did you do instead? We stopped playing his game and started playing ours. Destiny smiled grimly. Ghoul expected military confrontation. We gave him economic warfare. He expected us to work through Afghan government channels he controlled. We went around them entirely. He expected predictable responses to his provocations. We gave him completely unexpected ones. Ruby's expression shifted from despair to curiosity. Such as, well, Ghoul made money by controlling village markets. So we helped other villages start competing markets. He used fear to keep people isolated. So we organized community meetings that were too big for him to intimidate. He bribed local officials to ignore his crimes. So we documented everything and sent it to officials in Kabul who weren't on his payroll. Destiny pulled out her laptop, started typing. Most importantly, we made him react to us instead of us reacting to him. Kept him off balance, made him make mistakes, forced him to reveal his network by overreacting to threats. And that worked. Within 3 months, Ghoul was in Afghan prison and his entire operation had collapsed. Turns out bullies who've never faced real resistance don't know how to handle it when it finally comes. Ruby watched Destiny work, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a desperate waitress, but a trained soldier who'd successfully fought this exact type of war before. What are you doing now? Research. Every operation like Harrison's has the same vulnerabilities. Shell companies, tax evasion, building code violations they ignore for themselves while enforcing against others. Corrupt officials who've left paper trails. Surveillance equipment installed without proper warrants. Destiny's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing public records databases, property registries, business filings. In Afghanistan, we called this mapping the network. Identify everyone involved, find their weak points, then apply pressure where it hurts most. Is that legal? Completely. We're just using the same public information Harrison's been using against you. The difference is we know what to look for and how to use it effectively. An hour later, Destiny had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Wellington Development's operations. Shell companies designed to hide assets. Building code violations in Harrison's own properties that had been overlooked by inspectors. Tax assessments that didn't match actual property values. A web of corruption that would collapse if exposed properly. This is incredible, Ruby said, reading over Destiny's shoulder. How did you learn to do this? Military intelligence training. You'd be amazed what's in public records if you know where to look and how to connect the dots. Destiny's phone rang. Harrison's number. Answer it, Destiny said. Put it on speaker. Let's see how confident he sounds now. Ruby answered. "Hello, Harrison." "Ruby, I trust you've had time to consider yesterday's inspection results. I'm prepared to make one final offer, $1.5 million, immediate closing, all safety issues resolved at my expense." "That's very generous," Ruby said, glancing at Destiny. "It is. Especially considering the alternative. Chief Morrison tells me the violations are worse than initially assessed. Criminal negligence charges are possible if someone gets hurt." Ruby's voice stayed steady. "Before I answer, I have a question. Did you know your Wellington Development LLC filed tax returns claiming this building was worth $400,000, but you're offering $1.5 million to buy it?" Silence on the line. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Tax evasion," Destiny called out loudly enough for Harrison to hear. "Federal crime. Especially when it's part of a pattern involving multiple properties." Another long silence. "Who is that?" "My business advisor," Ruby said smoothly. "She's been reviewing your offer very carefully." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Harrison said, his voice tight with anger. "We're going to settle this today." The line went dead. Ruby looked at Destiny with new respect and growing confidence. "He's rattled," Destiny said. "Good. Rattled people make mistakes. What happens when he gets here? We find out how far he's willing to go when his usual tactics stop working." "And Ruby," Destiny smiled. "This time, you're not facing him alone." Outside, storm clouds gathered as Harrison's Porsche raced through morning traffic toward a confrontation he wasn't prepared for. In the diner, two women prepared for war using weapons Harrison had never encountered. Intelligence, strategy, and the unshakable confidence that comes from having won this type of fight before. The game was about to change completely. The minutes before Harrison's arrival stretched like hours. Ruby sat at the counter, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching Destiny organize files on her laptop. The transformation was complete. The desperate waitress had vanished, replaced by someone who moved with military precision and spoke with quiet authority. "I should have known," Ruby said softly. "The way you carried yourself. How you stayed calm when Harrison was screaming. My late husband served in Vietnam. He had the same look you get when you're thinking strategically." Destiny glanced up from her research. "What look?" "Like you're 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Like you've seen worse than whatever's happening right now." "I have seen worse. But that doesn't make this easier." Destiny saved her work, closed the laptop. "Ruby, there's something else I need to tell you. About why I really joined the army." Ruby waited, recognizing the weight that preceded important truths. "After my grandmother died, I felt lost. Like I didn't belong anywhere. Small towns felt too small, big cities felt too big. I was working dead-end jobs, watching everyone else build lives while I just existed." Destiny moved to the window, looking out at the empty street. "One night, I was closing up at the hardware store and these guys came in. Drunk, aggressive, making comments about the black girl working alone. When I asked them to leave, they started pushing me around. Calling me names. Making threats." Ruby's face hardened. "What happened?" "I was terrified. Completely helpless. They left when a police car drove by, but I'll never forget that feeling. Being powerless when someone wants to hurt you." Destiny turned back to Ruby. "I joined the army the next week. Told myself it was about serving my country, but really, I just never wanted to feel that helpless again. And now I know the difference between being powerless and being outnumbered. Harrison thinks he has all the advantages, but he's never faced someone who knows how to fight this kind of war." Ruby stood up, walked over to Destiny. "I need to tell you something too. About why this diner means so much to me." She gestured around the damaged dining room. "When Harold and I first moved to Milbrook, this was the only place in town that would serve black customers. We sat right there in that corner booth, sharing a slice of pie and dreaming about owning our own business someday." Tears gathered in Ruby's eyes. The original owner, Mrs. Patterson, she was a white woman who stood up to the town council when they tried to pressure her into segregating. Lost half her customers, but she never backed down. She sounds like she was brave. She was. And when she got too old to run the place, she sold it to us for a fraction of what it was worth. Said she wanted it to stay a place where everyone was welcome. Ruby walked to the wall where faded photographs showed the diner's history. Black and white images of community gatherings, birthday parties, holiday celebrations. Generations of families who'd made memories in these booths. Harold died 8 years ago. Heart attack right there by the coffee machine. I thought about selling then, moving somewhere quieter. But I kept hearing Mrs. Patterson's voice. This place is bigger than any one person, Ruby. It's about what we stand for. Destiny studied the photographs, understanding now why Ruby had fought so hard against impossible odds. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about preserving a legacy of resistance against exactly the kind of hatred Harrison represented. That's why you couldn't sell to him, Destiny said. How could I? Mrs. Patterson stood up to segregationists. Harold and I stood up to people who said we didn't belong here. Now Harrison wants to erase all of that, turn it into luxury condos for people who look exactly like the ones who tried to keep us out. Ruby wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders. When you refused to clean up his coffee yesterday, you reminded me of Mrs. Patterson. She would have done the same thing. And look how that ended up. Me humiliated, you facing condemnation. No, baby. You showed everyone in here that Harrison could be stood up to. That he wasn't as powerful as he pretended. That was the first crack in his armor. Destiny felt something shift in her chest. The shame she'd carried about backing down, about letting Harrison force her submission, began dissolving under Ruby's perspective. I felt like I failed you. You protected me. There's a difference. Ruby took Destiny's hands. In the army, did you ever have to make tactical retreats? Of course. Sometimes you have to fall back to better positions. That's what you did yesterday. Fell back, gathered intelligence, planned a counterattack. Just like a good soldier. The parallel hit home. Destiny had been judging her actions by civilian standards, not military ones. In combat, temporary setbacks were normal parts of larger strategies. Yesterday's humiliation hadn't been defeat. It had been reconnaissance. Ruby, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we really fight Harrison, it's going to get dangerous. He's not going to just give up and walk away. I know. He has connections, resources, people willing to break laws for him. They might try to hurt you directly. Ruby's expression hardened. They already have hurt me directly. The question is whether I'm going to let them finish the job or fight back. Destiny recognized the look in Ruby's eyes. The same determination she'd seen in Afghan villagers who decided they'd rather die fighting than live under oppression. Okay, but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures. We use strategy, not emotion. What's the first step? Destiny reopened her laptop. We document everything. Every threat, every manufactured violation, every corrupt action. Build a case so solid that when we expose it, Harrison's network can't claim ignorance or frame it as misunderstanding. She pulled up the video from last night's fake inspection. This footage proves Chief Morrison participated in creating false evidence. Federal crime if we can connect it to a pattern of civil rights violations. Civil rights. Harrison's using his wealth and official connections to deny you equal protection under the law. Targeting you specifically because of race and economic status. That brings in FBI jurisdiction. Ruby's eyes widened. You think they'd actually investigate? If we present them with enough evidence to make ignoring it more dangerous than acting on it. Destiny started typing rapidly. I'm uploading this video to secure cloud storage. Multiple copies. Multiple locations. Insurance policy. Her phone buzzed with another threatening text. Last chance. Walk away now or everyone you care about suffers. Destiny showed the message to Ruby. Empty threat or real one. In Afghanistan, we learn to judge threats by capability, not rhetoric. Harrison has money and local connections. but he's not actually violent himself. He hires other people for that. Like who? The men who've been vandalizing your diner. Chief Morrison. Probably others we haven't identified yet. Destiny studied the message more carefully. But look at the language. Everyone you care about. That's someone trying to sound scary, not someone who actually knows how to be scary. Ruby laughed despite her fear. How can you tell? Real threats are specific. We know where you live. We know your daily routine. We know your daughter goes to Roosevelt Elementary. This is just generic intimidation. Destiny typed a response. Bring it. Ruby gasped. Should you antagonize them? I'm not antagonizing them. I'm testing their resolve. If they respond with more empty threats, we know they're bluffing. If they escalate to specific actions, we document everything and add it to our evidence file. The phone stayed silent. No immediate response to Destiny's challenge. They're evaluating, Destiny said. Trying to figure out who they're really dealing with. Good. Uncertainty makes people cautious. Ruby poured fresh coffee for both of them, her movement steadier now. Tell me more about Afghanistan. About the villages you helped. Spin Boldak was the hardest case. Ghoul had been terrorizing them for 3 years. Burned crops, kidnapped family members, murdered anyone who resisted openly. By the time we arrived, people were completely broken. Destiny sipped her coffee, remembering. The village elder was a man named Haji Noor. Reminded me a lot of you, actually. Dignified, principled, refusing to give up even when giving up was the logical choice. What changed things? Haji Noor made the same decision you're making now. Decided that dying with dignity was better than living without it. Once he committed to fighting back, other people found their courage too. Ruby nodded slowly. It's easier to be brave when you're not alone. Exactly. And Ghoul's biggest mistake was assuming isolated people would stay isolated. Once they started working together, sharing information, coordinating resistance, his advantages disappeared fast. Destiny pulled up a map of Milbrook on her laptop. Same principle applies here. Harrison's been picking off businesses one by one, keeping everyone isolated and afraid. But what if they weren't isolated anymore? She marked locations on the map. The hardware store, the flower shop, the small grocery, the church where Ruby's friends attended. How many other business owners has Harrison threatened? How many other people are afraid of losing everything but don't know how to fight back? Ruby's face lit up with understanding. You want to organize them. I want to give them what Haji Noor gave his village. Hope. Information. A plan that might actually work. But what if they're too scared to join us? Then we show them it's possible to win. We beat Harrison publicly, visibly, in a way that proves he's not as powerful as he pretends. Ruby stood up, pacing now with growing excitement. The church ladies saw what happened yesterday. Frank and Helen too. They felt ashamed about not helping. Shame is a powerful motivator. Channel it right, and it becomes courage. How do we reach them without Harrison's surveillance picking it up? Destiny smiled. We don't avoid the surveillance. We use it. Let Harrison hear exactly what we want him to hear while the real organizing happens through channels he can't monitor. She gestured toward the hidden camera device. Every word we've spoken today has been recorded. Harrison knows we're not backing down. He knows I have military training. He knows we've found evidence of his corruption. Isn't that dangerous? It's psychological warfare. We're making him react to incomplete information while we gather complete intelligence about his operation. Ruby looked at the surveillance device with new understanding. So when he arrives, he'll be expecting a confrontation based on what he's overheard. But we're going to give him something completely different. Destiny closed her laptop, gathered her files. Ruby, are you ready to find out how far Harrison's willing to go when his usual tactics stop working? Outside, the black Porsche turned onto Main Street, moving fast toward a meeting Harrison thought he controlled. Inside the diner, Two women prepared to turn the hunter into the hunted. The real war was about to begin. How do you think the community will respond when they learn they're not alone in fighting Harrison's intimidation? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. Harrison's Porsche slammed to a stop outside the diner, tires squealing against wet pavement. Through the window, Destiny watched him emerge like a man preparing for war. Gone was yesterday's calculated composure. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd spent the night obsessing over the surveillance footage from their conversation. "He's rattled," Destiny murmured to Ruby. "Good. Rattled people make mistakes." Harrison burst through the door without his usual theatrical entrance. No casual survey of his domain, no deliberate table selection. He strode directly to the counter where Ruby and Destiny waited, his face flushed with barely controlled rage. "Enough games," he snarled. "I know exactly who you are now, Ms. Johnson. Military intelligence, 18 months in Afghanistan, specialized in disrupting local power structures. Very impressive resume." Destiny kept her expression neutral. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You see, I made some calls last night. Turns out you're not the only one with military connections." Harrison pulled out his phone, showed them a screen displaying official-looking documents. Dishonorable discharge. Failure to follow orders. Psychological instability following combat trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder requiring ongoing medication. Ruby gasped, looking at Destiny with concern. Destiny's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "The story gets better," Harrison continued, his confidence returning as he sensed an advantage. "Seems you had a complete breakdown during your final month overseas. Attacked a superior officer. Spent 2 weeks in military psychiatric detention before they shipped you home." "That's not true," Ruby said firmly. "Isn't it?" Harrison's smile turned vicious. "I have the medical records right here. Paranoid delusions, violent outbursts, inability to distinguish between combat zones and civilian environments. Sound familiar?" Destiny felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same suffocating sensation that had haunted her since returning from Afghanistan. The official records Harrison was quoting weren't entirely false. She had been hospitalized. She had struggled with distinguishing between war zones and safe spaces. She had lost control once, badly enough to end her military career. "The question is," Harrison continued, "does Ruby really want to trust her business to someone who can't tell the difference between Afghanistan and a small-town diner? Someone whose own military threw away like damaged goods?" The words hit like physical blows. Every insecurity Destiny had carried since her discharge, every nightmare about being too broken for civilian life, every moment of self-doubt came flooding back. She saw Ruby's expression shift from support to uncertainty. "I looked into your discharge records too," Harrison said to Ruby. "Did you know your business advisor here spent 6 months homeless after leaving the military? Living in her car, working day labor when she could function well enough to hold a job." Ruby's eyes widened. Destiny had never mentioned the homeless period, the months when veteran services failed and she'd fallen through every social safety net. "Addiction problems," Harrison continued reading from his phone. "Multiple arrests for vagrancy. Failure to maintain stable employment or housing. And now she's here, filling your head with fantasies about fighting back against problems that require adult solutions." Destiny's hands started shaking. The surveillance device behind the counter was recording everything. Harrison's research team would know exactly which psychological pressure points would be most effective. They'd found her weak spots and applied precision strikes. "Stop," Ruby said quietly. "Stop what?" "Telling the truth." Harrison's voice grew louder. "This woman is mentally ill, Ruby. She's confusing your situation with some war zone from her past. She can't help you because she can't even help herself." The dining room felt like it was closing in. Destiny's breathing became shallow, the familiar prelude to panic attacks that had plagued her since Afghanistan. She could hear explosions that weren't there, see threats that didn't exist. "You're having an episode right now, aren't you?" Harrison observed with clinical detachment. Elevated heart rate, shortness of breath, paranoid scanning of the environment. Classic PTSD symptoms. Ruby moved closer to Destiny, but Harrison stepped between them. Don't enable her delusions, Ruby. This woman needs professional help, not encouragement to play soldier in civilian conflicts. Destiny closed her eyes, trying to use the breathing techniques from therapy. But Harrison's voice kept cutting through her defenses. I spoke with her last commanding officer this morning, Colonel Reynolds. He said Destiny was a promising soldier until the psychological breakdown. Now she's what they call a casualty of war. Too damaged for military service, too unstable for civilian responsibility. The shame was overwhelming. Every word Harrison spoke was technically true, just stripped of context and weaponized for maximum damage. She had been discharged for psychological reasons. She had been homeless. She had struggled with addiction and employment. The worst part, Harrison continued, is that she's dragging you down with her, making you believe you can fight battles that were lost before they started, filling your head with military fantasies that have nothing to do with real-world business problems. Ruby looked back and forth between them, confusion and concern warring in her expression. Destiny, is this true? Destiny couldn't speak. The panic attack was building strength, making coherent thought nearly impossible. All her confidence from this morning, all her strategic planning and military expertise, felt like elaborate self-deception by someone too broken to recognize her own limitations. Of course it's true, Harrison said. Why do you think she was working at a hardware store instead of using her supposed intelligence training? Why do you think she was desperate enough to take a waitress job from someone she barely knew? He pulled out another document. Here's her veteran disability rating. 70% disabled for PTSD, depression, and anxiety disorders. The government pays her not to work because they've determined she's too damaged to function in normal society. The final blow landed perfectly. Destiny's disability payments were something she'd never told Ruby about, ashamed of being labeled too broken for full employment. Harrison had found every secret, every weakness, every source of self-doubt and turned them into weapons. She's not a war hero, Ruby. She's a war victim. And victims can't save other victims. Ruby stared at Destiny, who was now visibly struggling to breathe normally. The strong, confident woman who'd seemed so capable an hour ago appeared to be dissolving before her eyes. I trusted you, Ruby said quietly. The words hit harder than anything Harrison had said. Destiny looked up, saw disappointment and betrayal in Ruby's eyes. The same expression she'd seen on Colonel Reynolds' face when her career ended. The same look from potential employers who discovered her military record. Ruby, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me about who you are? That you're as broken as Harrison says. I'm not. Look at yourself right now. You can barely stand up straight. You're having a panic attack in the middle of a conversation. How are you supposed to help me fight anything? Harrison watched with satisfaction as his psychological warfare achieved its intended effect. Divide and conquer. Turn allies against each other by exposing vulnerabilities and creating doubt. This is exactly what happened in Afghanistan, he said conversationally. She thought she could solve problems with military tactics, ended up making everything worse. The village she's so proud of saving? It was destroyed in Taliban retaliation 3 months after she left. Destiny's legs gave out. She grabbed the counter for support, the weight of that revelation crushing what remained of her confidence. Spin Boldak destroyed. All her work, all the lives she'd thought she'd saved, erased by consequences she'd never considered. That's why they discharged her, Harrison continued. Not just for attacking an officer, but for catastrophic mission failure that got innocent people killed. Stop, Ruby whispered, but without conviction. The truth hurts, doesn't it? You put your faith in someone whose track record is failure and mental illness. Someone who can't tell the difference between reality and whatever war is still playing in her head. Destiny slumped against the counter, overwhelmed by the cascade of shame and self-recrimination. Every fear she'd had about being too damaged for civilian life was being confirmed publicly, recorded for posterity by surveillance equipment. Here's what's going to happen, Harrison said, his voice returning to businesslike calm. Ms. Johnson is going to leave town immediately and seek the professional help she obviously needs. And you, Ruby, are going to accept my offer before I lose patience entirely. He placed a contract on the counter. $1 million. Final offer. Sign now, or deal with the consequences of trusting a mentally ill homeless veteran who's been lying to you since she arrived. Ruby stared at the contract, then at Destiny's broken form, then back at Harrison's confident smile. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on her shoulders. You have 5 minutes to decide, Harrison said, checking his expensive watch. After that, the offer drops to $500,000 and the building gets condemned for the safety violations my team documented last night. He walked to a booth and sat down, pulling out his phone to make calls while Ruby faced the hardest decision of her life. Trust a woman who'd just been exposed as fundamentally dishonest about her capabilities, or surrender to someone who'd systematically destroyed every other form of resistance. Destiny remained collapsed against the counter, struggling to breathe through the panic attack while Harrison's words echoed in her mind. Failure. Mental illness. Delusions. Too damaged to help anyone, even herself. The surveillance device recorded everything. The complete psychological destruction of Ruby's only ally, the exposure of military records that painted heroism as mental illness, and the systematic dismantling of any hope that resistance was possible. Harrison made his calls with casual confidence, already planning the demolition schedule and condo construction timeline. In his mind, the war was over. He'd won through superior intelligence and psychological warfare, just like he always did. But in focusing so completely on destroying Destiny's credibility, Harrison had made a critical error. He'd revealed the true extent of his surveillance capabilities, his willingness to weaponize medical records, and his connection to people who could access classified military information. Most importantly, he'd shown Ruby exactly what kind of man she was really fighting. Not just a greedy developer, but someone who would torture a mentally ill veteran to win a business dispute. The question was whether Ruby would recognize the significance of what she'd witnessed, or whether Harrison's psychological warfare had been too effective to overcome. The diner fell silent except for Destiny's labored breathing and the soft sound of rain against boarded windows. 5 minutes to choose between surrender and a resistance led by someone who might be too broken to lead anything. The shatter point had arrived. Ruby stared at the contract on the counter while the silence stretched like a wire about to snap. $1 million. Enough to pay off her debts, relocate somewhere peaceful, start over without the constant fear. All she had to do was sign her name and walk away from everything she'd fought to preserve. Beside her, Destiny remained slumped against the counter, lost in the grip of panic and shame. The confident soldier who'd promised to help her fight back had collapsed into someone who could barely stand upright. Harrison's psychological assault had been surgical in its precision, targeting every weakness with devastating accuracy. For minutes, Harrison called from his booth, not looking up from his phone. Ruby picked up the pen Harrison had provided. Her hand trembled as she held it over the signature line. 37 years of history reduced to a single decision. Sign and surrender, or refuse and face whatever Harrison had planned next. She looked around the damaged diner, seeing it through different eyes now. The photographs on the wall showed decades of community gatherings, celebrations, quiet moments of human connection. Mrs. Patterson serving coffee to the first black family brave enough to eat here during integration. Harold teaching their daughter to count change at the register. Generations of people who'd found belonging in these red vinyl booths. Ruby, Destiny whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ruby turned to study Destiny's face. Even through the panic attack, even crushed by Harrison's revelations, something in Destiny's eyes reminded Ruby of Harold. The same look he'd worn during his worst moments with PTSD from Vietnam. Broken, ashamed, but still fundamentally decent underneath the damage. What are you sorry for? Ruby asked quietly. For lying to you. For making you believe I could help when I can't even help myself. What else? Destiny looked confused. What? I said, what else are you sorry for? You apologized for lying and for not being able to help. What else? Destiny struggled to focus through the panic. I don't understand. Ruby's voice gained strength. Are you sorry for standing up to Harrison yesterday? Are you sorry for refusing to clean up his coffee when he spilled it on purpose? No, but... Are you sorry for finding evidence of his corruption? Are you sorry for showing me that his safety violations were manufactured? Ruby, that's different. I was wrong about being able to fix this. Were you? Ruby walked to the wall of photographs, pulled down the one showing Mrs. Patterson serving the first black customers. This woman was 63 years old when she decided to integrate this diner. You know what the town council told her? Destiny shook her head. They said she was too old to understand modern realities, too naive to grasp the economic consequences, too weak to handle the backlash from segregationists. Ruby's voice grew stronger with each word. They told her she'd lose her business, her reputation, maybe even her safety if she kept serving black customers. Ruby placed the photograph on the counter between the contract and Destiny. You know what she told them? What? She said her age and weaknesses didn't matter. What mattered was whether she was going to spend her final years as someone who stood up for what was right, or someone who stayed silent because fighting back was hard. Harrison glanced up from his phone, irritation flickering across his face. 3 minutes. Ruby. Stop wasting time on inspirational speeches. Ruby ignored him, focusing entirely on Destiny. Mrs. Patterson had arthritis so bad she could barely hold a coffee pot. Her late husband had left her with debts she couldn't pay. Half the town wanted to boycott her business into bankruptcy. But she won in the end, Destiny said weakly. No, baby. She lost almost everything. The boycotts nearly destroyed her business. She had to sell this place to Harold and me for practically nothing just to avoid foreclosure. Destiny looked confused. Then why are you telling me this? Because she won the only battle that really mattered. She looked at herself in the mirror every morning for the rest of her life, knowing she'd done the right thing when it was hard. That's the only victory that lasts. Ruby walked back to the counter, picked up the pen again. But instead of moving toward the contract, she turned to face Harrison directly. You know what I learned from Mrs. Patterson? That sometimes the choice isn't between winning and losing. Sometimes it's between being someone you can respect and being someone you can't. Harrison stood up impatiently. 2 minutes. Ruby. Sign the paper or face the consequences. I heard you, Ruby said calmly. I also heard everything else you said in the last hour. She gestured toward the surveillance device behind the counter. That little camera you installed? It recorded you talking about accessing classified military records. About using medical information to torture someone with PTSD. About destroying a business through manufactured safety violations. Harrison's confidence flickered. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Ruby pulled out her own phone, showed Harrison the screen. I've been recording too. Everything you said about obtaining her military records illegally. Everything about the fake inspection last night. That won't help you. I have connections. To people who can access classified government databases without authorization? To officials who create false safety reports? To surveillance experts who break into private businesses? Ruby's voice carried new authority. Because that's what you just confessed to on camera. Destiny slowly straightened up, beginning to understand what Ruby was doing. The panic attack wasn't gone, but it was being pushed aside by growing amazement at Ruby's courage. You think anyone will believe the word of a mentally ill veteran and a desperate old woman? Harrison's mask was slipping completely now. I own this town. I own the officials, the judges, the prosecutors. You own corrupt local officials, Ruby corrected. But federal investigators tend to take a dim view of organized civil rights violations, especially when they're documented on video. Harrison's face went pale. You're bluffing. Ruby walked to Destiny, helped her stand upright. Am I? You just spent 20 minutes explaining exactly how you obtained classified military records, used them to psychologically torture a disabled veteran, and coordinated with corrupt officials to manufacture evidence. She looked directly into the surveillance camera. All of that is federal crime territory. civil rights violations, abuse of government databases, conspiracy to commit fraud. The kind of charges that carry prison sentences even for rich people. Harrison rushed toward the counter. Delete that recording. Delete it right now. No, Ruby said simply. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy this whole town before I let you. Let me what? Hold you accountable for criminal behavior. Destiny found her voice, still shaky but growing stronger. Ruby's right. What you did today isn't just unethical. It's federal crime. Accessing classified records without authorization. Using medical information for harassment. Conspiracy to violate civil rights. You don't know anything about federal law, Harrison snarled. Actually, I do. Military police training included civilian law enforcement procedures. I know exactly which agencies investigate these types of crimes. Destiny pulled out her phone, started dialing. FBI field office in Cincinnati handles federal civil rights violations in this region. Harrison lunged for her phone, but Ruby stepped between them. Touch her and add assault to your list of charges. You can't be serious about this, Harrison said, desperation creeping into his voice. I made you a fair offer. Take the money and walk away. Everyone wins. Everyone except the next community you decide to terrorize, Ruby replied. Everyone except the next veteran you decide to torture for standing up to you. She picked up the contract, tore it in half. I'm not signing anything. I'm not selling anything. And I'm definitely not walking away from this fight. Harrison's composure completely shattered. You stupid old woman. You have no idea what you're doing. I will crush you. I will make your life so miserable you'll beg me to take this place. Probably, Ruby agreed calmly. But you'll have to do it while under federal investigation for civil rights violations. Tends to limit your options considerably. Destiny finished her call, hung up with renewed confidence. FBI field agent named Jennifer Walsh is driving down from Cincinnati this afternoon. Wants to see all our documentation about organized harassment and illegal surveillance. They won't do anything, Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have lawyers, connections. You have local connections, Destiny corrected. FBI operates on a different level entirely. They don't care about your golf buddies or your campaign contributions. Ruby walked to the door, held it open. I think you should leave now, Harrison. Come back when you have federal marshals with you, or don't come back at all. Harrison stared at them with pure hatred. Two women who should have been easy victims had somehow turned his psychological victory into legal catastrophe. His carefully planned intimidation campaign had transformed into documented evidence of federal crimes. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Ruby replied. You just don't realize it yet. Harrison stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the boarded windows. Through the glass, they watched him make frantic phone calls from beside his Porsche, probably trying to reach lawyers and fixers who could contain the damage. Ruby and Destiny stood in the sudden silence, both shaking from adrenaline and the magnitude of what had just happened. They'd crossed a line from which there was no retreat. The fight was now public, legal, and completely beyond Harrison's ability to control through local corruption. Ruby, Destiny said quietly, you just declared war on someone who could destroy your entire life. No, baby. I just chose to stop letting him destroy it slowly. Ruby looked around her damaged diner with new eyes. Mrs. Patterson was right. Sometimes the choice isn't between winning and losing. It's between being someone you can respect and being someone you can't. Destiny felt something shift inside her chest. The shame and panic from Harrison's attack were still there, but they were being overwhelmed by something stronger. Respect for Ruby's courage. Gratitude for being defended when she couldn't defend herself. And growing determination to prove worthy of such faith. What happens next? Destiny asked. We wait for Agent Walsh. We document everything we can remember. And we find out whether federal law enforcement is stronger than local corruption. Ruby picked up the torn contract, threw the pieces in the trash. And we start calling other business owners. Time to find out who else is ready to stop being afraid. Outside, Harrison's Porsche disappeared around the corner, carrying a man whose confidence had been shattered by two women who'd refused to stay victims. The real war was just beginning, but for the first time since this started, they were fighting it on their own terms. The choice had been made. There was no going back. Agent Jennifer Walsh arrived in an unmarked sedan just as the afternoon clouds broke apart, letting October sunshine stream through the diner's boarded windows. She was younger than Ruby had expected, maybe 45, with graying brown hair and the kind of steady presence that came from years of investigating cases that mattered. Ms. Patterson, Ms. Johnson. Agent Walsh shook hands with both women, then surveyed the damage to the diner with professional assessment. I've reviewed the preliminary materials you sent. This appears to be a textbook case of organized civil rights violations. Ruby and Destiny exchanged glances. After 6 hours of documenting everything, uploading files, and making phone calls, they'd begun to wonder if federal law enforcement would take their situation seriously. Agent Walsh's tone suggested they absolutely would. The surveillance equipment alone represents multiple federal crimes, Agent Walsh continued, examining the device Harrison's team had installed. Unauthorized electronic surveillance of a private business, violation of privacy rights, potential RICO conspiracy if we can establish an ongoing criminal enterprise. She pulled out a tablet, started taking photographs. But what really caught our attention was the illegal access to classified military records. That's a national security issue. The Pentagon is very interested in how Mr. Wellington obtained information from secure databases. Destiny felt a surge of vindication. The shame Harrison had tried to weaponize was becoming evidence of his criminal behavior. What happens next? Ruby asked. We execute search warrants on Wellington development offices, his personal residences, and Chief Morrison's files. Seize computers, financial records, communications. Build a comprehensive case that goes far beyond intimidating one business owner. Agent Walsh sat down across from them, her expression growing more serious. I need you to understand something. Mr. Wellington has already contacted some very expensive lawyers. He's claiming you're disgruntled extortionists trying to shake him down with false accusations. Ruby's heart sank. Do you believe him? Not for a second. His story has more holes than a screen door, and we've got corroborating evidence from other business owners who've contacted us since this morning. Other business owners? Agent Walsh smiled. Turns out you weren't the only people Mr. Wellington was terrorizing. Frank Morrison called us 2 hours ago. Apparently Harrison forced him to sell his hardware store using identical tactics to what you described. Ruby gasped. Frank never said anything. People don't talk about being victims of organized harassment. Too much shame, too much fear. But when they hear someone else fought back successfully, that changes everything. Destiny leaned forward. How many others? So far. 12 business owners, 3 property developers who wouldn't play ball, and 2 city council members who were threatened for opposing Wellington projects. Agent Walsh's expression hardened. This isn't a business dispute. It's a systematic campaign to control an entire community through intimidation and corruption. The diner door chimed. Ruby looked up to see Frank entering, followed by Helen, then the 3 church ladies from yesterday's lunch crowd. Behind them came more people Ruby recognized. Tom from the flower shop, Maria who ran the small grocery, elderly Mr. Patterson who wasn't related but shared the name. Hope we're not interrupting, Frank said, his face red with emotion. But we heard what you did this morning. How you stood up to Harrison and called in the FBI. Helen stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We came to apologize. For yesterday. For sitting there like cowards while he humiliated you. And to thank you, added Mrs. Coleman from the church, for showing us that fighting back was possible. Agent Walsh watched the gathering with interest. Ms. Patterson, Ms. Johnson, would you mind if I interviewed some of these folks while I'm here? Sounds like they might have relevant information. For the next hour, the diner filled with stories Ruby had never heard. Tales of harassment, manufactured emergencies, corrupt inspections, and economic pressure that had destroyed lives and businesses throughout Milbrook. Harrison's operation had been far more extensive than anyone realized. Tom's flower shop had been condemned after inspectors found mold problems that didn't exist until Harrison's crew created them. Maria's grocery had lost its vendor licenses after mysterious complaints about food safety. Mr. Patterson had been forced to sell his auto repair business when the city suddenly decided his 40-year-old building violated new environmental regulations. Why didn't anyone ever speak up before? Destiny asked. Because we thought we were alone, Maria answered. Harrison made sure we never talked to each other about what was happening. Kept us isolated, scared, ashamed. Frank nodded grimly. He told each of us the same thing. Cooperate quietly or watch everyone we cared about suffer. Made it seem like resistance would only make things worse for the whole community. Agent Walsh finished taking statements, then addressed the assembled group. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've described is a federal racketeering conspiracy. Use of intimidation, fraud, and corruption to control legitimate businesses. We're looking at potential charges that carry decades in prison. A collective gasp went around the room. These were people who'd lived their entire lives believing that wealthy, connected men like Harrison were untouchable. But here's what I need from all of you, Agent Walsh continued. Complete honesty going forward. No more staying silent out of fear. If Harrison or his people contact you, document everything and call me immediately. She handed out business cards to everyone present. This investigation is going to take time. Months, possibly years. Mr. Wellington will try to intimidate witnesses, bribe officials, maybe even flee the jurisdiction. We need you to stay strong and work together. Ruby looked around at her neighbors, seeing determination replacing fear in their faces. What can we do to help? Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Run your businesses, serve your community, refuse to be intimidated. The best evidence against organized crime is a community that won't stay victimized. The diner door opened again. This time, Harrison entered with two men in expensive suits who were obviously lawyers. He looked haggard, desperate, but still clinging to his belief that money and connections could solve any problem. Agent Walsh, I presume, Harrison said, his voice carefully controlled. I'm Harrison Wellington, and these are my attorneys. I understand there's been some misunderstanding about a simple business dispute. Agent Walsh stood up slowly. Mr. Wellington, you're under investigation for federal civil rights violations, illegal surveillance, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unauthorized access to classified government databases. Harrison's lawyers immediately stepped forward. Our client has no comment on any alleged criminal activity. Any questions should be directed through our offices. That's fine, Agent Walsh replied calmly. Mr. Wellington, I'm serving you with this federal search warrant for your business and personal records. You have the right to be present during the search, but you cannot interfere with our investigation. She handed him an official document. Harrison's face went white as he read the charges listed in the warrant. This is harassment, one of his lawyers protested. Our client is a respected businessman being persecuted by disgruntled former tenants. Former tenants. Ruby stood up, her voice carrying new authority. I've never been your tenant, Harrison. I've been your victim. All of us have. She gestured around the room at the assembled business owners. But we're not victims anymore. We're witnesses. Federal witnesses. Harrison's gaze swept the room, seeing for the first time the unified opposition that had formed against him. People he'd terrorized individually were now standing together, protected by federal law enforcement, ready to testify about years of systematic abuse. You have no idea what you've done, he said to Ruby, his mask slipping one final time. I could have made you rich. Instead, you've destroyed everything. No, Harrison, Ruby replied calmly. You destroyed everything. We're just making sure everyone knows about it. Agent Walsh stepped between them. Mr. Wellington, I suggest you accompany us to your offices for the search. Your lawyers can advise you on cooperation procedures. As Harrison was led away, the people in the diner watched in stunned silence. The man who'd terrorized their community for years was being walked out in handcuffs by federal agents. The nightmare was ending. Frank broke the silence first. So what happens to our businesses now? The ones he forced us to sell. Agent Walsh paused at the door. If we can prove those sales were obtained through criminal conspiracy, they can be voided. Fraudulent contracts have no legal standing. Hope flickered in Frank's eyes. You mean we might get our businesses back? It's possible. Depends on what we find in the investigation. But I'll tell you this. Communities that stand together usually find ways to rebuild what criminals tried to destroy. After Agent Walsh left with Harrison and his lawyers, the diner remained full of people who'd rarely spoken to each other before today. The shared experience of Harrison's harassment had created bonds that his isolation tactics had prevented for years. We should meet regularly, Maria suggested. Keep supporting each other. Make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Every Friday, Ruby agreed. Right here. Community lunch and business meeting. Free coffee for anyone who needs to talk. Tom raised his hand tentatively. I've been thinking about reopening my flower shop. If the charges stick and the sale gets voided. When the charges stick, Destiny corrected firmly. Agent Walsh wasn't bluffing. Harrison's going to prison for a very long time. Ruby walked to the wall of photographs, touched the picture of Mrs. Patterson serving the first black customers during integration. She would be proud of what happened here today. All of us choosing to stand up instead of staying silent. As the afternoon wore on, people began making plans. Shared resources for reopening businesses. Mutual support networks for dealing with ongoing investigation stress. A community watch system to prevent future predators from gaining foothold. Destiny found herself at the center of strategic discussions, her military experience helping organize effective resistance and communication systems. The skills Harrison had tried to dismiss as mental illness were exactly what the community needed to protect itself. You know what the best part is? Ruby said as the last neighbors left that evening. Harrison thought he was fighting a scared old woman and a broken veteran. He never realized he was fighting an entire community that just needed someone to show them how. Destiny smiled, feeling lighter than she had since returning from Afghanistan. In Spin Boldak, we learned that individual soldiers can't win wars. But communities that fight together can defeat any enemy. Ruby locked the door, turned off the lights, and looked around her damaged but victorious diner. Tomorrow would bring reporters, more FBI agents, probably protesters supporting Harrison. But tonight, she went to sleep knowing she'd honored Mrs. Patterson's legacy and given her community the courage to reclaim itself. Outside, Milbrook settled into darkness, a small town where justice had finally arrived and ordinary people had discovered their extraordinary power to stand together against those who would prey upon them. The war was over. Love, courage, and community had won. 6 months later, the spring morning sun streamed through the new windows of Ruby's diner as Destiny wiped down tables before the breakfast rush. The red and white checkered curtains had been replaced, the walls repainted, and the bulletproof glass removed. But the photographs remained, now joined by new ones showing the community's rebuilding efforts. Coffee's ready, Ruby called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the contentment that had replaced months of fear and exhaustion. Agent Walsh's prediction had proven accurate in every detail. Harrison Wellington was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unauthorized access to classified databases. Chief Morrison received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. 12 other officials and contractors received sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. The fraudulent business sales had all been voided by federal court order. Frank reopened his hardware store in January. Tom's flower shop was thriving again. Maria's grocery had expanded to include a small cafe section. The downtown area that Harrison had planned to level for luxury condos was now a vibrant district of locally owned businesses. But the most significant change wasn't economic. It was the community bonds that had formed through shared resistance. The Friday meetings at Ruby's had evolved into a formal small business association with mutual aid funds, shared marketing, and collective bargaining power that prevented any future predators from gaining foothold. Destiny had found her place as the association's security coordinator, using her military intelligence training to help members identify and counter various forms of fraud and intimidation. The skills Harrison had tried to weaponize as mental illness had become the foundation for community protection systems, now being replicated in other small towns. The bell chimed as the first customer of the day entered. Destiny looked up and froze. The man was in his early 50s, wearing a simple black suit and moving with military bearing that reminded her painfully of someone she'd tried to forget. "Excuse me," the man said quietly. "Are you Corporal Destiny Johnson, formerly of the 82nd Airborne?" Destiny's hand moved instinctively to her shoulder, where her military tattoo lay hidden beneath her uniform shirt. "Who's asking? My name is Colonel Marcus Wellington. I believe you served with my son." The coffee pot in Ruby's hands nearly slipped. Harrison's father. The family patriarch whose money and influence had enabled years of community terrorism. Destiny prepared for another confrontation, another attempt to intimidate or manipulate. But Colonel Wellington's expression held no threat. Only grief and something that looked like gratitude. "Timothy was my youngest son," he continued. "He died in Afghanistan 18 months ago. Roadside bomb outside Kandahar." Destiny's breath caught. Timothy Wellington. The name that should have been tattooed on her shoulder blade along with the other soldiers from her unit who hadn't made it home. The revelation that never happened because Harrison's psychological assault had targeted her mind instead of her clothing. "I know who you are," she said carefully. "Then you know I'm Harrison's father. And you probably expect me to be here defending him or threatening you for putting him in prison." Ruby moved closer, ready to call Agent Walsh if this turned dangerous. But Colonel Wellington raised his hands peacefully. "I'm not here about Harrison. I'm here about Timothy." His voice broke slightly. "I received a letter from your former commanding officer, Colonel Reynolds. He told me what really happened the day my son died." Destiny's military medical records, the ones Harrison had illegally obtained and weaponized, had been part of the federal investigation. Colonel Reynolds had been contacted as a witness, and the full context of her discharge had finally been revealed. Timothy Wellington had been separated from his unit during a Taliban ambush. Destiny had disobeyed direct orders to return to base, instead spending 6 hours searching for him under enemy fire. She'd found him critically wounded, stayed with him until medical evacuation arrived, and held his hand as he died from injuries too severe for field treatment. Her attack on a superior officer had been striking a lieutenant who tried to physically prevent her from attempting the rescue. Her psychological breakdown had been combat trauma from watching a 19-year-old soldier die in her arms after she'd risked everything to save him. "Colonel Reynolds told me something else," Colonel Wellington continued. "Timothy's final words. He asked you to tell his family that he wasn't afraid, that he was proud to serve, and that he loved us." Tears gathered in Destiny's eyes. She'd carried those words for 18 months, too ashamed of her discharge to contact Timothy's family, too broken by survivor's guilt to believe she had the right to deliver a final message. "I never got to tell you," she whispered. "I wanted to, but after my discharge I thought. You thought we wouldn't want to hear from someone the military had labeled as damaged goods." Colonel Wellington's voice carried its own pain. Colonel Reynolds explained how the Army handled your case. How they focused on your violation of orders instead of your heroism. How they discharged you for mental health issues instead of honoring you for trying to save my son's life. Ruby stepped forward. "Sir, your son Harrison." "My son Harrison is exactly where he belongs," Colonel Wellington said firmly. "In prison, paying for crimes I should have stopped years ago. I knew he was using the family money and influence destructively, but I told myself it was just aggressive business practices." He looked around the diner, taking in the photographs of community rebuilding, the evidence of lives Harrison had tried to destroy. "I didn't know the extent of his cruelty until the FBI investigation revealed everything. The harassment, the psychological torture, the systematic destruction of innocent people's lives." His voice hardened. "Timothy died serving his country. Harrison dishonored everything Timothy represented." Colonel Wellington reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. "This is Timothy's final letter home. The one he wrote before the patrol where he died. I thought you should read it." Destiny opened the envelope with trembling hands. Timothy's handwriting was careful, thoughtful. "Dad, if something happens to me, I want you to know that serving here has taught me what really matters. It's not the money or the family name or the business empire. It's standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's using whatever advantages we have to protect the innocent instead of preying on them. I hope I'm making you proud by being someone who fights for justice instead of just fighting for profit." The letter continued for 2 pages, describing Timothy's admiration for soldiers like Destiny who'd grown up with nothing but chose to serve anyway, his plans to use the family wealth for veteran support programs after his deployment, and his determination to be worthy of the Wellington name through service rather than inheritance. "He was nothing like Harrison," Destiny said softly. "No. Timothy was everything I hoped both my sons would become. Harrison was everything I failed to prevent." Colonel Wellington's voice carried years of regret. "Which brings me to why I'm really here." He pulled out another envelope, much thicker than the first. The Wellington Family Trust Fund contained $50 million designated for Timothy's inheritance. Since he died without heirs, that money legally reverts to Harrison. Ruby gasped. Even in prison, Harrison would eventually inherit a fortune that could fund decades of future corruption and revenge. "However," Colonel Wellington continued, "I've spent the last 6 months working with attorneys to establish the Timothy Wellington Foundation for Veteran Support and Community Development. All $50 million will be dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of abuse Harrison perpetrated." Destiny stared at him in amazement. "You're giving away Harrison's inheritance?" "I'm honoring Timothy's values instead of enabling Harrison's cruelty. The foundation will provide business loans to communities targeted by organized harassment, legal support for victims of corruption, and mental health services for veterans struggling with civilian transition." He handed her the thick envelope. "I'd like you to consider serving as the foundation's executive director. Colonel Reynolds assures me you have exactly the skills and experience needed to identify communities under attack and organize effective resistance." Ruby grabbed Destiny's arm excitedly. "This is perfect. You could help other places fight back before they get as bad as Milbrook was." Destiny looked around the diner that had become her sanctuary, at Ruby who'd become like family, at the photographs showing a community that had learned to protect itself. The idea of using her military training to prevent other Harrisons from destroying other communities felt like the purpose she'd been searching for since her discharge. "There's one condition," she said to Colonel Wellington. "What's that?" "The Foundation's headquarters stays here, in Milbrook, at Ruby's diner." She smiled at Ruby's delighted expression. "This community taught me that healing happens when people support each other. I want other communities to learn that lesson here." Colonel Wellington nodded approvingly. Timothy would have loved that. Fighting corruption from a place that refused to be corrupted. 6 months later, as Destiny reviewed grant applications for the 20th community requesting help against organized harassment, she finally understood why her military service had ended the way it did. She'd needed to experience powerlessness to truly understand how power should be used. She'd needed to face her own brokenness to help others heal from theirs. The shirt-tearing revelation from that first morning had never literally happened. But the metaphorical exposure had been far more powerful. Harrison's psychological assault had stripped away her pretenses and defenses, forcing both women to see themselves and each other clearly. What he'd intended as destruction had become the foundation for something stronger than either could have built alone. Ruby's diner remained the heart of Milbrook, but now it was also the nerve center for a growing network of communities learning to protect themselves from predators like Harrison Wellington. The photographs on the walls now included pictures from dozens of towns where the Timothy Wellington Foundation had helped ordinary people discover their extraordinary power to stand together against those who would prey upon them. And in the corner booth where Mrs. Patterson had first served black customers during integration, a new photograph held place of honor. Ruby and Destiny shaking hands with Colonel Wellington as they signed the Foundation Charter, with Timothy's portrait watching over them, finally at peace knowing his sacrifice had led to something larger than any one person's grief or guilt. The love that had conquered Harrison's hatred wasn't romantic or simple. It was the complex, powerful love of community that emerges when people choose to protect each other instead of just protecting themselves. It was the love that transforms individual weakness into collective strength, that turns victims into victors, and that proves every day that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary evil when they refuse to fight alone. The war was truly over. Love had won completely. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.